Open.
Outspoken.
It's Ophthalmology Off the Grid.
An honest look at controversial topics in the field. I'm Blake Williamson.
I'm Gary Wörtz.
Thank you for listening to Ophthalmology Off the Grid. In this episode, Dr. Bill Trattler shares his unique horror story in which a referring optometrist family member presented with dark brunescent cataracts in both eyes. Hear more about the complications he encountered next. Support for this podcast comes from Bryn Mawr Communications. BMC produces a number of informative podcast series spanning a variety of topics in ophthalmology. Discover a new show at itube.net/podcasts.
Welcome to Ophthalmology Off the Grid for another exciting episode of Horror Stories. I'm here with my co-host, Blake Williamson. Blake, this season has been interesting. We've sort of been all over the place, and we have a good friend with us. Why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest for today?
Yeah, Bill Trattler, you may have heard of him, comes from a place called Florida, which is just east of us in Louisiana, south of you in Kentucky. But he's the dude that I'll always call whenever I'm trying to figure out what to do on a crazy refractive case, and the answer is almost always PRK. Not always, but often. But we know that Bill has really a tertiary referral center from all over for difficult refractive cases. So we knew that he would have some interesting horror stories to take us through. Bill, thanks for hopping on. How you doing, man?
Oh man, I'm doing great. Thank you both for having me. I'm super excited. This is obviously an important topic. It's fun in the sense that it makes you think and also plan for the future. So I love being part of this, and thank you so much for having me.
Bill, I don't want to embarrass you, but I have to say, Bill was sort of one of the people who connected me to all the other people that I have developed as colleagues and friends. And we actually sort of just met. It was sort of like online dating service for ophthalmology. It was the ASCRS chat board back in the day where you would go on and you would post a question and someone would chime in, and then there'd be a big debate. But Bill, back in the day, I was just a resident when I started posting on there, and I always valued your feedback, and then got to meet you in person, and since then it's just been so nice to count you as a friend and as a colleague and as a mentor. Bill, you've been foundational, I would say, in getting cross-linking pushed through with ACOS. You've been a huge supporter for ophthalmologists who just need a second opinion about, hey, what should I do here, Bill? And so for all of those reasons and many, many more, you're special to ophthalmology and to Blake and myself. So I don't hope that doesn't embarrass you, but I felt like it's worth saying that before we get started. So take us through a little bit about your practice. And then we'll get into a story or two about, maybe not your best day.
Of course. Well, thank you, Gary. Thank you, Blake. And I just love helping, and I learn from all of you all the time too. So I think it goes all different ways. Like I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't my relationship with both of you. And so with that in mind, my practice is here in Miami. I have 15 doctors in my group. I have 13 ophthalmologists and 2 optometrists. And I'm lucky because I have 4 retina doctors, I have 2 oculoplastics, and then we have 4 corneas. So we have a whole mix of specialties in our group. My dad's part of the group. And then I have a big competitor in town, my wife. So she's in the group, Jennifer Lowe. She's about a mile from me. She's got 4 ophthalmologists in her group, including herself, and 2 optometrists. And then we have fun because we actually operate in the same surgery center on the same day at the same time. So we're there to support each other for interesting cases and challenging cases.
Do you ever send her a case where someone gives you the weird vibe, like, I don't think this person is going to be a great multifocal candidate? There's this amazing ophthalmologist, Dr. Lowe. I think you guys would really get along. She's really an expert in this area. You're send her those little gifts, those little presents.
She just knows how to talk to patients, but still I try to be kind and I know that it's probably better that, I try to do my very best and help those challenging patients. But some of those have ended up with her just because they switched insurances. And she reminds me, wow, that was a challenging case, or, personality wise, they happen. But I think all of us are we're good. All have a good way of talking to patients. That's what I love about both of you. You are really good with talking about, because I've heard you speak on the podium about how you speak to patients, and you have really good rapport with your patients. So I think we all learn from each other.
So we're talking about horror stories. Before we started, we were just sort of going through, a recent story of yours. I'm not sure if you want to start there, if you want to start with something else, but the story that I only heard the tip of the iceberg, and Blake hasn't heard this. So why don't you kick us off by telling us a little bit of the background of this story, and just sort of go through it, because I was on the edge of my seat.
Right. I think all three of us are very lucky in that we have good relationships with our local ophthalmologists and local optometrists. And every once in a while, they trust us with a family member, and I feel very honored when that happens. It really means a lot to me that they trust us, and it's nice to send a regular patient. When they send a family member, that means that they trust you, and you want, of course, to do your very best and give the very best outcome. And so the optometrist who was so kind of send me a patient, her mom did give me a heads up that it had been a little while that she had the cataract, and had definitely probably gone a little bit longer than she would have liked, but it took a while for her to get to me. And when I saw her, she had very, very advanced cataracts, basically, a little bit worse than, I guess, hand motion cataracts in both eyes. And one was worse than the other, and definitely very advanced. And, it was one of those situations where, well, she's going to be a tough case, but, we've all handled tough cases. So I wasn't too worried. We all feel confident going to the operating room that we could, really help our patients, especially a family member. So I was very excited to make a difference for her. So, and nothing else was out of the ordinary. No exfoliation, nothing else, and no other red flags. It was just a very, very dark brunescent cataract that looked challenging.
I think it's like there's an old saying, like the plumber is always the last one to get his pipes fixed or something. Like in ophthalmology or in optometry, are we the worst at like taking care of our own family members because we're just so busy at the office we never get around to like doing our own eye exams? Blake, what do you think about this?
Yeah. I just did my Uncle Bill's cataracts like 2 weeks ago. Y'all know Uncle Bill, like the world's famous, most famous femto shooter.
Yeah.
He loves to tell y'all he's the femto king. He's like 76 or something like that, and swore he did not have a cataract. Finally, I made him sit down. The dude had like 20/80 vision, and I'm like, "What are you doing? Like what?" And so he's like, "Okay, we'll do it. Well, I guess we'll just do it now." And I just done a bunch of cases. Like I was like, "No, Uncle Bill, you have to get biometry. You have to get like an OCT of your macula. Like he's just so impulsive." But he just didn't even. He just kind of like, "Oh, it was kind of okay." And I'm like, "No, man." So anyway, yes, I agree.
Did he insist on shooting the laser for his own eye? Did he put the finger on the trigger for his own laser?
No, he had my Uncle Brett do it, our PA.
Okay.
He's been helping us. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
I find this phenomenon where basically if you're an ophthalmologist or optometrist, we wait a little bit longer than we should. I think it's just sort of how it is. We sort of like, I'm in presby denial, I'm totally presbyopic, but I'm like, I can still see what I need to see. I'm fine. I'm okay. So, all right, go on, Bill, go on with your story, because this is I feel like a typical setup. You've been set up for an interesting day here.
Absolutely. So, I got into the case, and, again, I felt very confident, but I knew the challenging case. And so, one of the things I always struggle with is do I need vision blue? And I feel pretty good about doing, cases without vision blue. But if I don't need vision blue, I don't use vision blue. And also I don't use Mulligan rings if I don't need to, because I think, because oftentimes we can do quite nicely. And so she had a mid-dilated pupil, not the most biggest dilated pupil. I did use vision blue, and I was able to get, probably a little bit smaller capsulotomy than I really should have made. And I think that was the major error that led to the challenging case, because I think if we can make a really big capsulotomy, it makes these really dense cataracts much easier. Has that ever happened to either of you where you ended up with a smaller capsulotomy than you hoped in a dense cataract?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is I don't like going underneath the iris where I can't see the edge of the rexus. I've seen Ike Ahmed do a perfect 6 millimeter capsulotomy through a 2 millimeter pupil. He just infers using the force where the edge is. I've seen Jason Jones do that as well. I'm not that good. I like to visualize the edge of my capsulotomy. So occasionally I'll use like a Kugelin or something and like move the people over. But at that point, I'm probably just going to put a ring in but yes, I've definitely had smaller rexuses with mid-dilated pupils, and then you're fighting it the whole time.
So again, I had other choice. I could have made a snip and made it bigger. I could have put a myoglin ring in at that point, but I still felt confident I would do nicely. So my technique is, and everyone has their own technique, and I've watched both of your videos before and how you guys operate, but I like to make a double wide groove. So what I'm doing is make a central groove that's twice as wide as the phaco tip, and that allows me to get pretty deep and crack. And I usually am pretty successful. And I had already done hydrodissection. I was able to, the lens would move. I also like my loop, but I thought that with the smaller capsulotomy and the smaller capsulotomy, that maybe I should do, avoid the my loop. And so what I did next is I did the double wide groove, and I just had real difficulty cracking. And so it just would not split into. It was just such a dense plate. And then you're kind of, well, gosh, maybe I should have done the my loop. But then you kind of get in that situation where, you're just trying to keep stretching, and I kept, trying to, groove a little bit more and crack. But eventually I realized I had made a capsular. I tore the anterior capsule. And usually that's not a big deal, right? I mean, that's all happened to all of us.
Right. And also not to interrupt, but it's these leathery posterior plates where if you're grooving, you've got to get so deep to be able to get that leathery stuff to actually crack, that I always worry that I'm going to, if I am grooving, that I'm going to groove too far. And so you're really, it's a dangerous situation just because of the cataract, the morphology of the lens is so dense back there that you have to groove really, really deep to be able to have a chance at it. And, it's sort of, it's kind of like skating on thin ice.
Yeah, and these leathery ones, I think, are definitely worse than the white ones, right? So the white ones are actually easier, especially if they're soft, kind of milky ones. But even when I get like an Argentine flag sign sometimes, and I do have that radial tear, Bill, as you just said, oftentimes you're still okay. You're kind of like on pins and needles the whole time. And yes, it's not going to look pretty post-operatively aesthetically, but oftentimes they do just fine. So you're still safe right now. I mean, we're not at the point of no return yet.
Absolutely. And so I still felt confident. What I did is I couldn't crack it in the main group. So I said, okay, let me just at least make it into some small pieces. So I rotated and tried make it like a divide and conquer. And it was during that part where I'm going deeper in that area and I started splitting that I realized that the capsular tear had gone all the way to the back because the lens started to sink. And so,
and your heart was not a fun too. And your heart was sinking.
Oh my God. It was like, it makes you so stressed because, you want to keep going, but you shouldn't keep going, because if you try to grab the lens and pull it up, vitreous can start coming forward, and there's just too much lens for me to figure out. And I don't do. I know we have some of our colleagues that do pars plana vitrectomy in this situation, do lift the lens. That's just not me.
No. So Blake, do you do that? Do you do pars plana vitrectomy and try to posterior elevate and all that stuff?
No, I do the exact opposite, because almost always there's 20 to 30 people waiting to have their cataract done, and they have no idea what just went on in that room. They're expecting everything's hunky dory, and so that's the tough part as the surgeon, is that it's just like throwing an interception as a quarterback in an NFL game. You just have to next play, right? And so I find that oftentimes just placing a stitch in the eye and having a good conversation with the family member and the patient right there outside the PACU is helpful. And I send them immediately to my retina doctor who does that type of stuff every single week and enjoys it and has all the tools and all the different, small gauge, vitrectors and everything. Is just way better at it than I'll ever be. And so I know that he's going to clean it up for me. So I don't feel like I'm the best one suited to do that. I think I'm better at doing other things.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And it's like your pride sinks faster than the lens. And that is what is so hard about it. But there is actually sort of a place for couching still. Like, this is the perfect time. Just be like, boop, see you later. It's the cornea.
If only.
Salute the lens as it goes down and move on, because honestly, knowing when to say when, I think is actually a really mature response for a surgeon. And that saves your patient rather than trying to save your own pride. So, okay, take us through the rest of the story here.
Right. So I did exactly as Blake suggested. I stopped I put a stitch in, and what I did, I tried calling my retina doctor to see if they'd come in, but since there's no informed consent, they said, no, we're going to do it another day. And so that was the plan, is we just stopped, and I had the patient, I talked to the patient, the family, then we come back another day. And of course they're anxious. Like, she was really expecting to see well, relatively soon. And so it was definitely a challenging conversation afterwards. And then, I sent her to the retina doctor the next day in the same challenging conversation. Okay, when can we do the surgery? Now, the problem is this patient had significant corneal edema, and the retina specialist said, no, we're not doing anything, and actually waited for a couple of weeks. But of course, to make matters a little bit, because until the corneal road cleared up, but then of course, it turned out that the patient, like 2.5 weeks later, did get a little bit of a endophthalmitis. Like, all of a sudden, the patient got inflammation, and it was like a late endophthalmitis. There was a stitch in place, and thankfully injections were placed, no vitrectomy, and that part eventually got better. It was like unbelievable, like one then two. And then eventually, this is like 6 weeks later, he was eventually able to go back in and do his part, and he took out the lens, and the patient's cataract, did the vitrectomy, and of course the big challenge, big question is what type of lens he put in, and everyone always talks about Yamane technique and scale fixated, but the retina doctors in our group have seen a lot of issues and issues with those lenses, especially with the haptics twisting and other things. So the patient ended up with an anterior chamber lens, but actually really good vision. I think the patient ended up being like 20/40 uncorrected, and was overall very, ended up being very happy. But many months, maybe 2.5 months down the road, was happy, but it did take a while, but we got there.
Do we think this is Blake? Do we think this is endophthalmitis, or do you think this is a delayed inflammatory reaction from the lens material? That's what goes through my mind.
I think it's probably the massive cataract that's hanging out in the posterior chamber. I don't know that it's a bacterial infection 2.5 weeks later. Yeah, you got treated all the same. I went through that with my ICL case. None of the cultures grew anything. It looked and acted and talked just like an endophthalmitis. I mean, but I was like, man, but I think it's just horrible inflammation. And so, did y'all pound with steroids too, Bill, or just do the IV antibiotics, intravitreal?
Yeah, the patient got the intravitreal, and the patient got intravitreal antibiotics, and the retina specialist who was monitoring her kept her on the steroids the whole time. And again, the patient cleared and did well. So the patient had basically, as you imagine, presented with a hypopyon, diagnosed with endophthalmitis, treated, again, had the intravitreal antibiotics, and it eventually cleared completely, and then was able to have the surgery with the ACIOL. So
the interesting thing in all this is we still got another eye to do, right? So what'd you do with the second eye? Have you done the second eye yet?
Well, I mean, here's the question. So sometimes patients lose confidence in their surgeons when they go through that type of situation. So I was very surprised that the patient actually came back to me for the second eye.
I'm not.
And a little disappointed?
No. I was like, I felt so confident. I thought through all the errors I made the first time, like not error, they weren't errors, but I should have done things a little bit differently. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make a bigger capsulotomy. I'm going to use the MyLoop. I'm going to try to do all these things to make it better.
Yeah, I'm not surprised you went back. But I mean, the reality is that even in these horrible situations, as we've heard from some of our colleagues this season, and certainly in my experience, all they want to know is, do you know what's going on, and do you have a plan? And if you can speak to that confidently, and if you know in your heart that there's a very close to 0% chance that this is going to happen for the second eye, which I think we all know is true. I mean, it's very, very unlikely. Then you can feel very confident about that. So every time I have a complication like that, it's similar. They almost always, we do the second eye, and I say, let's do it as fast as we can. Again, just like throwing an interception, what you need to do is get right back on the field as soon as possible, right?
I have all the confidence that you have that the second eye is going to go much smoother, and and that's what the family thought. The optometrist, okay, we know, you're a great surgeon. No. There shouldn't be any issues. No.
Are you setting me up right here? Oh no, it did not happen again. No, I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
It's something that you don't believe can be true, but it really truly happened again. And this is even with thinking, because I went in that day. We all have a lot of we won't talk about the numbers, but we all have a big surgical day. But there's no question on a day like that, you're thinking that whole time, I can't wait to get this patient. I know exactly what I'm going to do. You're thinking through the whole process of all the things you're going to do differently. And again, the capsulotomy would still be just a little bit smaller than would probably be optimal, bigger than last time, but still smaller. And I didn't feel just the way the lens was. I didn't feel confident with the MyLoop, so I did not use the MyLoop. But I felt that I could groove and either and use some chopping if I need to. But again, an anterior capsular tear develops, and the lens just started to move in the wrong direction. And right away when that happens, like all of a sudden the chamber's not the way things are responding. The lens is kind of bouncing a little bit, and I knew immediately that I was in trouble. And again, I said, I put the suture in again. I was very happy that the patient had such a good experience the first time, that even though we had to stop early, that it has great vision afterwards. So I said, listen, I know this is what you and I expected. I know we talked about it, but I'm putting in the hands of our retina doctor who saved your eye the first time, and he's going to do a great job for you the second time. And that's exactly what happened. So, and again, this is the family member of an optometrist. I had to, again, apologize to her. She still sends me patients. She's still so kind. And thankfully, the patient, she ended up with an ACIOL in her other eye, and she's seeing great in both eyes. She actually has really good vision in both eyes, but it was not the course that we expected.
So I just have to say, like, Bill and I were talking a little bit before. We generally, when we're on the podium, we talk about the things that we save, the new techniques, the innovation, the case planning, going through biometry, and it's like, these are the stories that I think humanize all of us and actually help us all feel a little bit more like, you know what, I'm not the only one who goes through tough days in the OR. I had a rough day last week, and I'm not going to get into the details of it, but I had 2 back-to-back cases that were really, really tough in my first 10. And the 2 cases took about 2.5 hours, and they were back-to-back. So usually things don't happen back-to-back, but this did. So, right. I've got 26 or 27 cases to do, and it's noon, and it's just like, I feel buried, and I'm just like, you know what? I just have to do one at a time. I just have to keep blocking and tackling, chop wood, carry water. It's just, I got to get through it. And, it's like, Bill, I just feel such empathy for how you felt in the moment of both of those things. And then getting the endophthalmitis call from the retina. Like, what would you do, Blake? You get the endophthalmitis call. Are you like, God, have I offended thee? Like, what are you thinking?
But the second I didn't get endophthalmitis or sterile infiltrate,
it did not. No, my God, thankfully it did not.
Progress.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
So what did you? So Bill, what about like? Did you think about like using your femto for the second case? Are you still doing LENSAR and all that? Or are you not doing that anymore?
Oh yeah, but she had a somewhat smaller pupil size, so she didn't really dilate that well. That was a problem. She wasn't the best dilator. So I love that, of course.
But you put a ring in. You put a ring in for the second eye, or you didn't think you needed?
I did. Yes.
Okay.
I didn't think I needed to, but I eventually did put a ring in after the capsulotomy, and I'm like, okay, I'm putting it in at that point, because it just ended up, you're trying to be cautious, and these dense cataracts, the capsule doesn't behave exactly the same way. It's a little bit of different, they're a little more fragile. It kind of tears a little bit differently. So I just was being extra cautious, and I ended up just being a little smaller. I say that I will be honest that I always feel good that I have amazing retina support in my practice. So the last thing I want to do is have that happen, but I know that the patient's going to do really well if I can't remove the lens. I don't feel like this is going to be a disaster. I feel that it's just delaying the visual recovery, but I know the patient will end up with a great result. So that's the other thing that, even though I was disappointed that I couldn't have removed the lens myself, I felt good and was able to feel confident talking to the patient that she would have a good outcome. It would just take longer than expected.
I think the title of this episode is Lightning Strikes Bill Trattler Twice.
There you go. I usually exude confidence and happiness and I could feel Blake was empathizing with me, and so are you, Gary. Of course, that these are challenging cases and they happen. And you think about it, when's the last time? I mean, it's been well over a year. I have not had to do that again, like where I had to stop and not finish the case. And right. So these are rare situations in our practice, but I know it's when it happens, I know when to stop.
Right.
Yeah, I know. I know that one of our doctors, one of our young doctors, was doing one of his first LASIK cases with us, and had a total freak out with the femto. Just like the whole thing came right off, and he was like, "What do I do?" And I was like, "Well, we just got to put it back on and put a bandaged contact lens on, and we'll live to fight another day. We'll do PRK in 3 or 6 months." And I've never experienced that because I never did microkeratome, right? So I mean, a free flap with a femto doesn't happen, right? So anyway, but afterwards, of course, he was shaken up, And one thing I told him, this applies to you too, Bill, I would think, is I said, the good thing is like, that'll probably never happen again. I said, that's as bad as it gets, literally. And chances are that will never happen again. And same to you, Bill, like chances are you will never have bilateral lens drops and ACIOLs and referring optometrist family member in the rest of your career. It's very unlikely.
Right. You got that one out of the way. You checked the box, the bingo card.
There you go. Exactly.
There you go.
I like it.
Well,
I like it. But, again, just going back to Blake's case of the free caps, the good news there is a couple of things. One, you can always remove the cap and the patient could have PRK with that because it's usually doesn't have power. So I know these are stressful situations, but the key is that we can make our patients end up still having good vision. So even if there's something that was unexpected and it's a horror for us to have happen, we know we can turn the corner and make these patients see well.
I think there's a dichotomy here. One thing I tell my staff, I sort of say is like, there's almost no limit to how much the eye can punish you. Like if things start going bad, it's like almost no limit to how bad it can get unless you stop. But also the eye is incredibly forgiving. If you if you have good colleagues, you know what to do when things go wrong and you know when to stop, the eye is incredibly forgiving. And so I think I think that's maybe a good place to stop and sort of sum this up. Bad things can happen, but if you manage it well and you're wise and know when to push the brakes, you can still have a good outcome, even, make par out of the sand trap, if you will. So Bill, thank you so much. I mean, these are the stories that I think make us all simultaneously, like our heart go out to you, but also makes me feel a little bit better that I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who's experienced something that, just you go home and you think, how in the world did that happen today? So Bill, thank you so much for being so transparent and honest. And that's why we love you. So can't wait to see you at a future meeting.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take us out, Blake.
We'll see you next time, my friends. I'm not sure if we're going to have one like that, but we'll try to find us another chili pepper from somewhere around the country and bring you something that will get your head turning. So until next time, we'll see y'all. It's been Ophthalmology Off the Grid.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ophthalmology Off the Grid, and thank you to our guest, Dr. Bill Trattler. Tune in to future episodes to hear more horror stories from top ophthalmic surgeons.